It
happens.
does happen. And
It happens.
And it has happened. So, but let's move on.
Yeah, let's do.
And
let's
get to the good stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I've seen this film now 2 nights in a row. Well, no, last night I was here for American Anarchist, but I saw Vivian Maier the night before, and there's so much here to unpack. That's my sense of this film. There's so much to talk about afterwards, and it's hard to even know where to begin. So here's what I think we should try to do. We're going to have a little talk, very briefly, or as long as we need to, which will be 5 or so minutes, right, Charlie? Is that our plan?
Yes, because everyone
Okay.
has been so patient. I want to get to people's questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quickly.
So I'm going to ask one question, and then we're going to open it up to other questions. And the way it's going to work is we have mics on both sides. Allison Halstead-Reed, yay, is going to hand the mic on this side to people who need, or she's going to hold it for you. That's how it's going to work. And if you have a question on this side, you can walk over there if you'd like to do that. And there's a standing mic there. So we'll get to that in just a second. But my question is, I really want to go back to the genesis of this film. I always want to know that, and I think some other people might as well, about briefly the story of the origin story of this film and how it came to be, how this creation happened, and what kept you, what was your journey along the way as a filmmaker? How did this final film differ from the film that you thought you might be making? Because sometimes that happens. And so that would be my first and only question before we open it up.
Okay, there's a lot there. I came into the project sort of midway through the story. I mean, the film shows that John found these photographs and had something very different in mind when he found them. He was working on a book and was looking for pictures of buildings and streets in Chicago, and found something very different. And then, as the film shows, you see what happens. I got involved when the reporting on that discovery started. There was no documentary. There was only John having found the work and having begun to put the work out there. And John had done a little bit of documenting of that story himself. I think he had the instinct to have some of that process filmed, and in particular, there were cameras at the Chicago Cultural Center when he first started to show the work. But then there was coverage in Chicago Magazine and by some local media, and then it got picked up in a bigger way. And it was at that point that I learned about the story. I became involved. Jeff Garlin is an executive producer on the film. Jeff, you may know from Curb Your Enthusiasm and from the Goldbergs. He's a Chicago comedian, stand-up improviser. He is and storyteller. He's also a photography buff and a friend, and so he got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in working on this project, on this film. And so I was familiar with the story. I said, yes, absolutely. I met John. John and I started talking about the story and how to tell it. It was a collaboration that then lasted another 3.5, 4 years before the film was finally finished, and we documented the story that unfolds and the process of trying to figure out who Vivian was and how she came to take all these photographs, never show them, and try to kind of unravel this mystery that he had discovered. The film that we thought we were making, I think, was a film about an odd, eccentric woman who was a nanny who just happened to somehow take a crazy amount of photographs and squirrel them away, and wasn't that strange, and look at the lady with the funny hats and the weird accent, and you know, that was the story. And there's some of that in the film, but what I have found in working in documentaries is that if you are sensitive enough to the material that you're working with and to people and their stories, the subject teaches you what the film is about. And so that's not at all what the film ended up being about, I hope. I hope it ends up being a film about an artist and what it takes to be an artist. And I think Vivian was first and foremost a brilliant, brilliant artist who made incredible sacrifices throughout her life in all kinds of ways, large and small, to create the work that she did and to leave this work as a legacy. And the film, I hope, teaches other would-be artists out there what it takes to pursue a passion, to make art in spite of incredible challenges, barriers, adversity, you know, and with all of the sacrifices that it takes to do that. On top of that, Vivian obviously was no longer alive when we were making the film. So we were telling the story of a person who was no longer there to help us tell it. We had her photographs, obviously. There were these audio tapes. There was film footage. And there were the stories of people who knew her. But she didn't have patrons. She didn't have benefactors. She didn't have people who helped her. There weren't galleries showing her work. There weren't museums that supported her. There weren't other artists. She wasn't part of a community of artists. So the only people that we could turn to help tell the story were her employers. And those are the people who thought that she wore funny hats and spoke with a fake accent or a real accent, or, you know, marched like a Nazi. Those were the kids who have stories about her being, you know, not a very good nanny and maybe bordering on and crossing the line into abuse, depending on what you think about the stories that they tell. And I think it's fair to sort of scrutinize anyone in a documentary film. I hope people do that, to judge for themselves what they think about the subject, what they think about the stories that they hear. Maybe even scrutinize what they think about the filmmaker and the filmmaker's techniques in telling a story, and judge for themselves. And I think what I certainly come away with, and I'm curious to hear what other people think, is that it's worth asking the question, do the people in the film telling Vivian's story, do they know Vivian? And are they reliable narrators, or are they, in some sense, unreliable narrators? And what do you think of Vivian, independent of what you heard from the people in the film? And do you look at the source and the relationship between the people telling you Vivian's story and Vivian herself? And does that play into your perception of them as storytellers, narrators, friends, employers, kids who she took care of, and what do you think of your what's your sense of the character, of the person, based on their work. I know one of the people in the film says you can't understand Vivian from her work, but Joel Meyerowitz, at the end of the film, clearly he is attempting to do that, to make judgments about who she was based on what you can see in her work. And so, yeah, I think if there's ambiguity about Vivian, some of that is there in her story, in the fact of us finding traces of her life in order to try to piece together her story. But some of it, and so some of it is just inherent in having an incomplete picture and having to tell her story without the benefit of having her here. But some of it is quite intentional in, I mean, the opening scene of the film, people are directly contradicting each other. One of them says she spoke with a French accent. One of them says she spoke with a fake French accent. One of them says she was 7 feet tall. One of them says, no, she wasn't 7 feet tall. She always posed her pictures. She never posed her pictures. And so that's quite intentional, and it maybe is a little bit frustrating for an audience or maddening, but I hope it's enjoyable. I enjoy watching films where I have to actively try to figure it out, especially if it's a kind of a detective story and a mystery story, and this certainly is that. And so the hope is that it put you in a position to make judgments for yourself about all of those things. And so I guess I would love to open it up for questions, and I'm as interested in hearing people's opinions in their questions as the questions themselves.
I have a question.
Who's going to take the bait?
Hi.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's a couple of voices that I seem missing from the collection that you have, and one would be the two boys that she took care of who helped her at the end of her life, so were you able to talk to them? And then also, did you talk to anybody at any of the photo labs? Because they might have seen that this was good work, and did they try and help her get it out there or anything like that?
Okay, I'm gonna assume everyone heard the question because now we have a mic tonight. I won't repeat the question. So the first answer is there is a family, the family we mentioned in the film, that declined to be involved. They chose not to be involved in the project. We had a lot of conversations with them over time. It was the family that she had spent the most time with. They felt particularly protective of Vivian, and it's unfortunate that they didn't participate, but of course respect their decision to do that. I don't think that there's anything in the film. I don't know that there would be anything that they would say that isn't already represented in the film. We, after all, have people telling us that Vivian would not have wanted this. That's, for example, you could speculate that would have been one of their opinions. I'm happy to hear other people's opinions about that. I completely disagree and think it's completely speculative, for starters, to think that Vivian wouldn't have wanted this. I think there are lots of explanations for why Vivian never showed her work, and not wanting to show her work is only one possible explanation of it. And of course, there's evidence to the contrary in the film that she did want to show her work, in fact, did show her work, had it printed in France, went to incredible lengths and expense to have that done, and just couldn't make a go of it commercially. And of course, that strikes me as true for many artists who would love to enjoy some level of commercial success and just aren't able to achieve it. And for a woman in particular at the time, and someone who did not come from means and had to have a day job and a nighttime job caring for children, living in the suburbs, living in an attic, carting her work around, spending money on storage lockers. I think the more plausible explanation, although I understand it's also speculative on my part, is that those were the barriers that kept Vivian from sharing her work and enjoying, whatever commercial success might have come from that. So that's one answer. The other question, can you just remind me?
Well, you just led right up to it, was, did you talk to any of the people who worked
Yes,
in the photo
labs.
labs?
Yeah, so the French
Right.
lab, obviously, we show in the film, that really was the...
Did she send that letter to him? Because it didn't seem like he had read it.
Yeah, I think he had. I mean, he had
Oh.
printed her work. Yeah.
Okay. But people in Chicago or wherever in the labs, she had all those receipts. You didn't manage to find anybody who was familiar with it?
No.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have another question right up here.
Just briefly, how much of this story did you know when you first started this project? And then lastly, as this, interesting woman, as her story kind of, as you discovered more and more, was there any piece, and maybe you just answered this, but was there any piece that you wish you would have included or were sad not to include in the film, just based on how it kind of unfolded?
So how much of the story did we? Well, so because we were discovering the story as we were making the film, and vice versa, I guess. It was a bit of a moving target, and John obviously is involved as a subject himself in that he was trying to get her work out there, have it seen, championing her work, the outcome of which was totally uncertain. It was not clear that by taking on the work of sort of obsessively, I think you see in the film, basically doing the work of finishing her photographs and getting them printed and cataloging them and then getting them out there in the world for people to see. It wasn't clear what the reception of that would be. I think it was gratifying to see that the work took off and that people were excited by it. And then, of course, that just led to more story. I mean, it meant that there would be a show in New York to film and in other places. And then, we just didn't know who we would find who knew Vivian. We didn't know the kinds of people we would find. And every receipt, every business card would yield some new little piece of evidence. Sometimes it was evidence of someone who actually knew her, and most of the time it was just a complete dead end. It was a business card that she kept for seemingly no real reason at all. And so that was part of the monumental task of sifting through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pieces of ephemera and notes and receipts and business cards to try to piece together something, anything that would tell us more of Vivian's story. So there was so much of it that we didn't know. We didn't know any of these people. We didn't know if we might find a lover, an intimate friend, someone, a relative. Of course, we found her cousin in France. So all of that was uncertain at the time that we undertook the detective work and then the film itself. And as for things that have been learned, I mean, since the film came out, there has been a fair amount of work done to try to piece together more about Vivian. And there's a woman named Anne Marks who has done an incredible job filling in the picture, completing the picture. of Vivian, and has just come out with a book about her, a biography. And so if people are interested, I would encourage you to look at Anne's YouTube page or whatever, where I think there's lots of stuff posted, talks that she's given, and she's done a lot of work to fill in the picture, and read her book. It's a hard question to answer, to say, is there anything that I wish had been included in the film that we've learned? I think it's sort of a cliche that films are never finished, or at least documentaries are never finished. They're only abandoned, and so I think at a certain point you just stop and you call the film finished. And certainly in this case, it felt like there were more business cards to examine. There were more receipts to look at. I will be the first one to admit that at a certain point, after looking and sifting through all of the evidence, sometimes you start to feel like you're on a very misguided mission, that you're piecing together evidence of what? Of a life, evidence of nothing. And after finding so many pieces of evidence that led nowhere, I think we started to feel justified in sort of resolving doubts in favor of some degree of uncertainty, in a way that we could make our peace and could make peace with. And so I don't really have regrets about that, and don't think that there's anything I wish had been in the film. There's also a lot of stuff that we knew about Vivian that we simply chose not to include. One little detail about that is there's a lot of question, and there's been more research into how did Vivian learn to shoot. We hang our hat on the fact that her mother had a camera, which we indicate in the film. Mm-hmm. She also lived with a famous photographer while she was a child, with her mom in New York. They shared an apartment. She was 4 at the time, and maybe possibly up to the age of 10. That to me seems less interesting than the fact that her mom was an influence. That's just a choice. It's just an editorial choice. I don't even know if it's the right one, and Anne Marks may have found even more, important information on that subject. Anyway.
Wow. Okay. Are there more questions?
I was interested in John Maloof. What got him? He got the auction for $380 or whatever. But then what was he doing? How did you meet him? Like, how did he? He kind of seems a little bit like not Vivian, but he's going on this inquiry that was great, But how did you come together, and what was he up to at the time that allowed him to do that?
I have the same sort of obsession with him, as well as a character in the film. I find him so interesting, and there are these threads of obsession that go through the film, and his is one of them. So yeah, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I think John is in some ways like a kind of a kindred spirit. I think Vivian is very lucky to have had her work fall into the hands of someone who was willing to champion it in that way, and had the, as he calls it, that sort of obsessiveness. He says he's sort of obsessive and very detail-oriented. He also has an incredible eye for, as he says, sort of picking things out of an alley. He told me stories about doing that. He grew up working class in a pretty rough part of Chicago, and had to be very scrappy to get by and make a living. He was working as a realtor in I think pretty depressed areas in Chicago, so selling homes that were not especially easy to sell, and had a real knack for that. He taught himself to shoot. He shot the film. He's an incredibly talented and tenacious person, and developed, to his credit, a real knowledge of mid-century photography, of Vivian's place in it. I think Howard Greenberg and his relationship with the Howard Greenberg Gallery helped him to do that. I think when he first posted all of her work, he knew where to post it, but he wasn't part of that community. He started to dabble in photography, partly as a result of finding Vivian's work. So I would say he's a dabbler, but really good at a lot of things, and just had just really good instincts for what to do with this work, and including relying on other people, including Joel Meyerowitz, who kind of became an advisor, confidant, friend, and Mary Ellen Mark, who we included in the film. So he had good instincts to know what he knew and what he didn't know.
And you. He included you in all of this.
Yeah, well, that was a relationship that changed my life, and I was incredibly lucky. I feel that I have gotten much more from this story than I ever gave to it, and I gave a lot, but I love talking about the film. I love talking about Vivian. I carry her story around in my head, and I feel lucky to get to do that, because I aspire to be some form of an artist, and so her example is very powerful, and I'm very fortunate to have gotten to be part of her story.
Can I ask one, just to follow up on John? So
Yeah.
was this like a side, he was doing his paid gig was real estate?
Yeah.
And then this was like a hobby that kind of took on a life of its own on the
Yeah.
side?
As he mentions, he
That's-
was looking for photographs for a book.
Yeah.
For like one of those little slim volumes about, like, I think there's one about Vashon that's at the bookstore. There's like those little small books that have lots of photographs and some narrative, and he was doing one of those on a Chicago neighborhood.
So he had projects. He
Oh,
was
yeah,
project-based
He was the
person.
kind of person who had lots of projects.
Yes, Allison.
I think the darkest moment in the film was the story of the child being force-fed. Did you have any hesitation about including that?
Again, everyone heard the question. Yes, is the answer. I had a lot of hesitation about that, and if I was convinced that it was untrue, obviously would not have included it. It seemed to resonate, and obviously Vivian was not there to defend herself, and so I was concerned about including it. I think there are some questions about the veracity of that story. I think it's fair to question any speaker about whether the stories that they're telling, whether their memories are accurate. Childhood memories can be complicated and sort of indeterminate, have pieces of the truth but not all of it. But ultimately, the decision to include that very troubling story was, I think, made easier by the fact that she was not the only one to describe abusive behavior or borderline abusive behavior, treatment. I don't think that Vivian was winning Nanny of the Year awards, clearly. And I don't think anyone would say that. But there was a sense of adventure. She introduced the kids that she took care of to art. She took them out of their element. She expanded their horizons. I think she was a force for good in general in most of these kids' lives, maybe with one or two exceptions. Even the ones who have some negative things to say. But ultimately, we decided to include that because it seemed to resonate with some of the other troubling stories that other people told. Yeah.
Thank you. Allison? Oh,
You've got.
Oh, okay. I'm
Okay,
sorry about
one
that.
there.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I need to fix my chair. Okay.
I'm wondering what your strategy is when you go to sit down with these interview subjects that you know are going to end up being these huge narrators of the story. And are you sure to do open-ended questions? How do you make sure you're not guiding it, or to what degree do you guide it? And then also, just out of curiosity, what brought you to Vashon part-time to live?
Aha. Yes, I told him that question would come.
I'll take the Vashon question first because it's the easier one. It's paradise. I love it here and want to spend as much time here as possible. I'm from Chicago originally. I grew up in the suburb where Vivian was a nanny.
Oh, wow.
The ravines where those kids played, where you see her with those kids, those are the ravines where I grew up playing. They look a lot like some of the ravines on Vashon, although it's on the shores of Lake Michigan and not the Puget Sound. So I'm lucky enough to have made my way from the suburbs of Chicago to Vashon with some twists and turns in between. New York, Los Angeles, but I can't think of a better place to be living right now.
Are you able to do work remotely here, or do you do a lot of traveling to LA? Or?
Well, the pandemic certainly has been sort of a game changer in many ways, yes, work-wise, it has meant doing work remotely and doing some traveling back and forth. But as far as interviewing and I don't know if it's sort of a general question about interviewing in documentaries. There are so many great interviewers in the documentary world. Errol Morris, who pioneered this Interatron technique of having people speak directly into the camera by projecting his face on glass in front of the camera, which I have actually used and just stolen outright from him in one project. So, I mean, basically, it's how to answer the question about interview technique. It's yes, open-ended questions are better than questions that are closed off. Questions that invite long, discursive, free association, asking open-ended questions, and not being afraid. I generally take the approach as an interviewer of not being afraid to repeat the formulation of a question. Tell me about blank. And I'm not afraid to say, tell me about blank 10 times over the course of an hour, or talk to me more about X, or because if you're not including your interview questions in particular in the finished film, and it depends on whether you're doing that or not. American Anarchist, which we showed yesterday, there are some questions included in the finished film. But if you're not including that, I am a big one for losing all vanity with your subject and letting yourself sound like an idiot in order to help that person relax, or sound like you're not very good at interviewing, and let them help you with the interview.
That's my technique.
By giving, let me help you get at what I think you're really asking in your clumsy way.
Yeah.
And if they're helping you, that's great. That means they're helping the finished film.
Thank you.
And yes, over here.
Oh, I'm just saying. Who owns the rights to Vivian's photographs, and are they being archived somewhere? I assume in all these galleries the prints were being sold. Who owns all that now? Since she had no heirs, right?
Right. Well, there are. So this is a subject that I would just encourage you, if you're really interested, to read more, because there has been a lot that has happened since the making of the film in this particular area. There are heirs. The French cousin is one, and then there are other relatives who have also surfaced. There is a probate proceeding that was initiated in the state of Illinois, and so basically the proceeds from the sales of Vivian's work is being overseen so that so that heirs do receive some portion of the proceeds from that, and that some of the proceeds go towards the project that John has continued of cataloging and printing her work and sharing it and taking her work on tours.
So is he going to do a catalogue raisonné of all of her work, or where is it going to be archived? Because it's an amazing body of work.
Yeah, so I know that he has had discussions with various institutions and museums, and I know that some of her work, some of her belongings is cataloged now at the University of Chicago. But the photographs, there are a number of books that have been published. There's a book of self-portraits, there's a book of her color work, and then there's the initial book, which was which was more all black and white in the street photographs. But the work is being curated. Someone has to make decisions about what to show, like where's the good work. Editorial decisions have to be made, and she's not here to do that. I mean, that is the kind of work that a photographer would do with the help of a gallery owner or other photographers. And John is doing that work again with the help of people like Howard Greenberg and other photographers. Yeah, but all of the work itself is being processed, and I imagine will be cataloged in some way. But how it gets shown, I think, is a delicate question, because I think you don't want to treat it like iPhone photographs. You don't want to treat it like Instagram and just put everything out there. I mean, again, this is me. I am not involved in that process at all, but this is me just imagining that you want to respect the process of any artist, and part of that is there's good work and there are misses, and especially with photography, where you have contact sheets, and some of the photos just aren't good and wouldn't be chosen by the photographer to be seen. I think there's an onus on anyone doing that work to try to figure out what the right answers are. It's certainly to pose those questions and ask, what criterion should be used to judge which work should be seen.
Hi. Well, I wanted to start off by saying that it was such a good movie, and the beginning really drew me in to make it like exciting, because I think it could have been like kind of boring, I guess. And so your beginning was so good, it just caught me, I guess. But the question that I had was, I thought it was interesting that the people were all interviewed individually, and I liked that, but I was a little bit like, wait, is she the mother of those kids or that or what? But I just thought it was interesting, and I was curious why you made the choice to do individual interviews.
I would say the individual interviews thing is partly because you don't want. Well, I don't know. I think we wanted a multiplicity of perspectives, that kind of Rashomon technique of having, allowing people to sort of, I don't know, testify, to use a courtroom term, get their statements on the record without the suasion of, without being swayed by what other people might say, get people's recollections, individual recollections. We had a couple of people in, a mother-daughter and a couple, and that's also interesting, and it's fun when they argue back and forth in moments. So we had a bit of that, but yeah, I think mostly it's to get sort of a multiplicity of points of view, and also just try to get people to kind of brain dump every recollection and not edit themselves because the person next to them might disagree or have a different version of it, or they might clam up because of the person next to them, and they might be telling something that they've never told them, those sorts of things. I think we just kind of wanted people's pure experience, and also their individual relationships with Vivian.
Yeah.
Because that's really what we were interested
And
in.
as a quick aside, I'm not sure if it was your filmmaking but they all seem so interesting to watch. And you must have been like, cool, these are some good characters.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Look, I'm a big fan of watching people talk. So the talking heads are out of fashion in documentaries, but for me, depending on what the story is, or what are, I guess, the themes, or what you're interested in, and what you're interested in doing, or what story you're telling, I think people are fascinating, and I think hearing how people talk and what they look like while they talk is interesting. I like to put the audience in the position of being a jury, and that I understand that connotes something sort of like guilty or innocent or whatever, but more it's just I like the audience trying to scrutinize and get inside people's heads while they're talking and see if they can figure them out. And I agree with you that they're all really interesting people. I wonder if they were interesting before they met Vivian, or if Vivian made them more interesting, or if Vivian seemed to or if it was a certain kind of person that could handle a Vivian in their lives. They were already a little bit odd or something. I don't know, or special. I don't want to say odd. I mean, they're wonderful. I just think they're all so wonderful. Yeah, so I think you have to really, or for me, I have to like my subjects. I have to like the people that I'm making films about, and like watching them talk in particular. And so, yeah, why wouldn't you want to listen to these people talk all day?
I have these people, I liked the active work that I was having to do, figuring out whose parents, which children went with which parents, and kind of doing my own little kind of detective work doing that. So I'm glad you did that, and I enjoyed it. I was still figuring it out the second time. That was part of the work I was doing, but it was interesting to me to see these great Chicago people. This is a very Chicago movie. Is anybody here from Do we have any Chicagoans in the house here? All right. Can't you just feel the Chicago part of this story too?
Yeah, the accent.
So, yeah, over here.
It was a beautiful, beautiful film. It was interesting you said her legacy, and I think a lot of artists have the privilege of having their legacy play out in their lifetime. And as you as a filmmaker, you are in this position where not only are you handling this beautiful work, but also the work of a woman who hated and feared men. And, you know, the deeper you get into the movie and the comments about how hard it was for her to be around men, did that occur to you? When you're making this film, you know, you have this woman's work in your hands who was very untrustful of men and also wasn't alive to see her legacy play out. How did that affect you as a filmmaker?
Specifically being male?
Well, the two things that you were able to, you know, bring her work to life without her being here.
Yeah.
And also the fact that the very people who are bringing her work to life are men.
Yeah.
And that she had a really, I mean, we don't know, but clearly that was a trauma for her.
Yeah. It's a hard question for me to answer. I mean,
Maybe it's not a question, but just a conversation about the privilege we have, or artists have, of watching their work play out in their lifetime. And, you know, how to honor those artists who don't have that. And also how to honor artists who have had really hard experiences with, you know, men, I guess. And how do you deal with that? And how's the conversation around that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my answer to that would be, or my comment, I guess a conversation starter would be to say that I hope the film does that. I guess I hope the film does honor her legacy. It is obviously a film very much about the fact that she did not get to enjoy the reception that her work has received. I think that she would have loved knowing that her work has been received in this way and that it's influenced people and it's inspired other artists. I think that what she saw through her camera and decided to record, moments that she trained her attention on, and that where she was, as Joel so eloquently says, had the sensitivity and thoughtfulness to be drawn to those subjects in that way and could get close to them in the way that she did, and see things, capture moments the way she did. I don't think that that's a private act. I don't think that art is a private act. I think it is meant to be shared. And the famous examples of Kafka, who wanted his work destroyed, and Emily Dickinson, the same. I think the world is better for having those works in the world. We are better for it. And I think the world is better for having Vivian's work in it. And hopefully the film, in part, talks about the tragedy of her not experiencing that during her lifetime, and a big part of that is that that would have meant breaking into a male-dominated world. There were other female artists, photographers specifically, who would have been contemporaries of hers who broke through, but that doesn't mean the barriers aren't there. They were, and they still are. So hopefully the story and the way the story has unfolded shines a light on that in some way.
Well, can I chime in?
Yeah.
Because I think that For me, one thing I kept thinking about was the artists among us, and Vivian is a sort of a example of that. Something, the film is about Vivian, but it's also about our own lack of awareness at times about the brilliance of someone that we happen to be dealing with, especially where we are in a relationship with them of some power over them or some kind of to me, it's a film that I would hope will keep me aware as I travel on to look for brilliance in every face, to look for and to believe that that's our potentiality. And so, to me, that's something I found really beautiful about the film. Watching it tonight was thinking about who can I discover? Who can I recognize who is equally brilliant to Vivian Maier? So I don't know. I just wanted to chime in with that.
Absolutely.
Lesson? Okay. You talked about the color photographs have been made available now or been in shows or whatever, but they weren't really that much a part of this film. I mean, was that a choice at the time, or was that a color not developed when you were filming?
The color photographs. The color photographs were developed later. They are also some of her later photographs. There are a bunch of reasons for that. There are some color photographs in the film. One of my favorites is the group of people in yellow on the street that all are wearing shades of the same kind of color yellow in the middle of a city street, looking like they belong in Palm Beach or something. I love that. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly the fact that that they were developed later, and were harder, I think, to curate. Yeah.
Well, thank you. You had so much material to choose from, and to be able to spin it together in a reasonable kind of storyline, I'm impressed with.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Are there any more? We could take it outside to the lobby if you'd like at this point. Thank you.
There's one there.
I have a
one more.
comment.
Sorry.
I saw this film on PBS a few years ago, and it really struck me and has stayed with me all these years. I don't know how many years ago I saw it. And I just want to thank you so deeply for coming and bringing it and sharing it.
Thank you for saying that.
What a lovely way to end. Thank you so much.
It's really my pleasure, and thank you to the VCA for hosting this. I'm really curious to hear if people will, let me know what they think about this as a viable series going forward. To have other filmmakers come and bring films and do this. Would love that. Thank you for coming.